We're counting down the 25 one-pot meals British grandmas made when money was tight. These were the suppers that turned a few shillings into a feast for six, simmering quietly on the back of the range while children did their homework and fathers came home from the pit. From peppery broths that stretched a single ham bone through a week to dumplings that swelled in the pot like little clouds of comfort, each entry tells the story of women who knew how to feed a family on almost nothing. Expect tough cuts coaxed into tenderness, vegetables grown on the allotment, and the unmistakable smell of a kitchen where nothing, absolutely nothing, ever went to waste. Which one-pot wonder tops our list? Let's begin our countdown with number 25. Number 25. Brown Windsor soup anchored countless British tables in the lean years after the war. A thick brown broth that turned the cheapest scraps of beef into something almost grand. Housewives browned shin or chuck with onions and carrots, thickened the lot with a roux of flour and dripping, and let it simmer for hours until the meat surrendered to the spoon. By 1953, Brown Windsor was a fixture on boarding house menus and family tables alike, costing barely sixpence a portion when a tin of fancy soup ran nearly a shilling. Children dipped crusts of bread into the dark, glossy liquid, while fathers swore it stuck to your ribs better than any restaurant fare. Oral histories from the period recall the steam fogging the scullery window and the quiet pride in a soup that asked for so little but gave so much warmth on a damp January night. Number 24. Savoury rice filled the gap between paydays in homes where the meat ration had run dry by Wednesday. Housewives fried an onion in a knob of dripping, added long grain rice and a crumbled OXO cube, then poured over boiling water and whatever vegetables had wilted in the larder. 20 minutes later, supper was on the table. By 1958, rice cost less than 5p a pound, making it one of the cheapest ways to fill a hungry child. A stray rasher of bacon or a handful of frozen peas turned the dish into something almost celebratory. The smell of frying onions drifted through the back kitchen and the pot was scraped clean by tea time. For mothers who had learned to count every penny during rationing, savoury rice was proof that a meal could be conjured from the corners of an almost empty cupboard. Number 23. Pan Haggerty warmed the stone cottages of Northumberland when the wind came howling off the moors. Housewives layered thin slices of potato, onion, and crumbly Lancashire cheese in a heavy iron skillet, then cooked the lot slow over a low flame until the bottom turned golden and the cheese melted into long stretching strings. The dish cost barely 4p a head in the early 1950s, yet filled a farmhand well enough to see him through an afternoon on the fields. Children watched mothers flip the pan with a quick wrist, fearful that the precious crust might break, while fathers waited with knife and fork at the ready. Oral histories recall the satisfying scrape of the iron pan and the knowing nods that passed between neighbours when they smelled Pan Haggerty drifting from a chimney on a cold November evening. Number 22. Peas pudding with bacon hock stood as the signature one pot of Tyneside, a meal that turned a sack of split yellow peas and a smoked bone into supper for the entire street. Housewives soaked the peas overnight, tied them in a muslin cloth, and dropped the bundle into the pot beside the bacon hock to simmer for 3 hours together. By 1955, a hock cost less than 1 shilling and fed a family of 6 twice over. Children watched the muslin lifted out, the peas mashed with butter and pepper into a smooth golden paste, while the bacon was carved into thick pink slices. The cooking liquor became soup the next day. Nothing was thrown away. For working families in the Northeast, peas pudding and bacon was the taste of getting through another week with the rent paid and the children fed. Number 21. Mince and tatties anchored the Scottish weeknight table with an honesty that needed no apology. Housewives browned a pound of cheap mince with onions in a heavy pan, added a splash of water, a crumbled stock cube and a shake of pepper, then simmered the lot until the gravy turned thick and dark. Boiled potatoes went straight into the same pot at the end, mashed into the meat with a wooden spoon. By 1960, mince sold for under 2 shillings a pound, making it the affordable backbone of family suppers from Glasgow tenements to Highland crofts. Children carved patterns in the mash with the tines of a fork, soaking up gravy from the corners. Oral histories recall the comfort of a meal that never disappointed, served without ceremony on Tuesday nights when the weekend felt impossibly far away. Number 20. Liver and bacon casserole stretched the cheapest cuts of offal into a rich, slow-cooked supper that quietly nourished a generation. Housewives floured slices of pig's liver, browned them with rashers of streaky bacon, then layered the lot in a casserole dish with onions and a thin gravy made from the pan juices. An hour in a low oven turned the liver tender and the gravy glossy. By 1956, liver cost less than 9p a pound, making it the cheapest source of iron a mother could put on her children's plates. The smell, strong and unmistakable, divided households into devotees and deserters. Yet for those raised on it, the memory is fond. The crusty corners, the soft onions, the way the gravy soaked into a slice of bread on the side. A meal that asked little and gave back the strength to face another shift. Number 19. Sausage and butterbean casserole turned a packet of bangers into a feast that fed 6 and still left enough for tomorrow's lunch. Housewives browned the sausages in a heavy pot, added tinned butterbeans, a tin of tomatoes, an onion, and a splash of Worcester sauce, then let it bubble away on a low ring for an hour. By 1962, a pound of pork sausages cost 1 and 3p, and a tin of butterbeans barely 6p. The whole supper came in under 2 shillings. Children fished for the sausages first, mothers ladled the beans over thick slices of bread, and fathers wiped the bowl clean with a final crust. The smell of tomato and sausage filled the kitchen by 5:30, a signal that tea was ready and that nobody in this house was going hungry tonight. Number 18. Faggots in onion gravy brought the taste of the Black Country to tables across the Midlands, a one-pot supper born of the butcher's leftover offcuts. Housewives mixed minced pig's liver, heart and belly with breadcrumbs, sage and onion, shaped the mixture into balls, and braised them slowly in a rich brown gravy until the kitchen filled with a herbal, savoury steam. A dozen faggots cost less than 2 shillings in 1957, enough to feed a family with mushy peas on the side and bread for mopping. Children watched mothers carefully turn the faggots in the pot, knowing that a broken one was a broken heart. Oral histories from Wolverhampton and Dudley recall the smell of faggots drifting from open windows on a Saturday afternoon, a regional supper that vanished from supermarket shelves, but never from the memories of those who grew up eating it. Number 17. Heart casserole asked for both a strong nerve and a steady hand, but rewarded the cook with a meal that fed the whole family for 2p a head. Housewives bought lamb or pig hearts from the butcher, trimmed away the valves, and stuffed the cavities with a sage and breadcrumb mixture before braising them slowly in onion gravy for 2 full hours. The meat, dense and lean, demanded patience, but gave back a richness that rivaled any joint. By 1955, a sheep's heart cost barely 4p at the butcher's counter. Children watched mothers tie the hearts with kitchen string, learning early that nothing edible was beyond redemption. The smell that rose from the casserole on a Sunday evening was deep, herbal, and faintly sweet. A grandmother's quiet triumph over the cruelty of an empty purse. Number 16. Cullen skink carried the taste of the Scottish coast inland to kitchens where money was thin and warmth was scarce. Housewives simmered a single smoked haddock with onions, milk, and floury potatoes, mashing the lot together until the soup turned creamy and golden. By 1954, a smoked fish cost barely 6p at the harbour, and the resulting pot fed 4 with bread on the side. Children watched mothers flake the haddock from its bones with practiced fingers, careful not to lose a single morsel. The smell, smoky and rich, drifted through tenement closes and cottage doors alike, a signal that supper was nearly ready. Oral histories from the northeast recall the comfort of a steaming bowl on a wet evening, the way the soup warmed you from the inside out, and the quiet pride of a meal made from almost nothing but the sea and a sack of spuds. Number 15. Pig's trotter broth fed mining families through the long northern winters, a soup so rich with natural gelatin that it set firm in the bowl if left overnight. Housewives bought trotters for pennies at the butcher's, simmered them for 4 hours with onions, barley and root vegetables, and skimmed the broth until it ran clear and golden. By 1952, a pair of trotters cost less than 3p, making it the absolute cheapest way to put protein on a family's table. Children watched fathers crack the bones with a sharp blow, sucking out the marrow with relish. The dish demanded patience, but rewarded the patient cook with a broth that stuck to the spoon and warmed the bones. Oral histories from Durham and South Yorkshire remember trotter broth as the taste of survival, a supper conjured from what others might have thrown to the dog. Number 14. Cow heel stew stretched the very cheapest cut the butcher offered into a meal that lasted 3 days. Housewives bought cow heels for 2p apiece, scrubbed them clean and simmered them with onions, carrots and pearl barley for the better part of a Saturday afternoon. The result was a thick, gelatinous stew that turned almost solid when cold and could be reheated again and again. By 1953, cow heel was the fallback of working-class kitchens in Lancashire and the West Midlands, a way to keep the family fed when the weekly wage had stretched as far as it could. Children wrinkled their noses at the wobbly texture, but ate eagerly once the steam rose from the bowl. Oral histories recall the slow bubble of the pot, the patience of the cook, and the deep, beefy flavor that no modern supermarket cut could ever replicate. Number 13. Mutton broth anchored the tables of hill farms and pit villages alike, a thick, barley-laden soup made from the toughest cut of the oldest sheep. Housewives bought scrag end of mutton for under £1 a pound, simmered it for 3 hours with pearl barley, swede, leeks and carrots, and ladled the result into deep bowls with bread on the side. By 1955, mutton broth appeared on tables across the north and in Wales at least twice a week, a one-pot supper that cost barely 4p a head and filled even the hungriest farmhand. Children watched mothers skim the fat from the surface, saving it for bread and dripping the next morning. Oral histories recall the smell of barley and herbs drifting through stone cottages and the comfort of a bowl that warmed the hands as much as the belly on a bitter February night. Number 12. Boiled bacon, cabbage and potatoes turned a single smoked joint into the centerpiece of midweek suppers in homes from Cork to Carlisle. Housewives soaked the bacon overnight to draw out the salt, then simmered it for 2 hours with whole potatoes and a wedged cabbage in the same pot. By 1954, a bacon collar cost just over 2 shillings and stretched to 4 meals across a week. The cabbage soaked up the smoky liquor, the potatoes turned soft and salty, and the bacon was carved into thick pink slices at the table. Children watched fathers wield the carving knife with quiet ceremony, while mothers saved the cooking liquor as the base for tomorrow's soup. Nothing was wasted. Oral histories from Liverpool and the Welsh borders recall this dish as the taste of a household where the rent was paid, the children were clothed, and supper still managed to feel like a small celebration. Number 11. Bubble and squeak with corned beef rescued Monday from the dreariness of leftovers and turned it into something almost looked forward to. Housewives chopped cold roast potatoes and Sunday's leftover cabbage, fried them in a heavy pan with a generous knob of dripping, then crumbled in slices of corned beef from a tin. The whole thing crisped and browned in one pan, hissing and spitting over the heat. By 1956, a tin of corned beef cost 1 and 6p, and a Monday supper of bubble and squeak fed 5 for under a shilling. Children fought for the brown, crusty edges, while mothers insisted the burnt bits were the best. Oral histories recall the unmistakable smell drifting through terrace streets on a Monday evening, a sign that the post-war housewife was making something wonderful from absolutely nothing she had not already cooked the day before. Number 10. Corned beef hash ruled the post-war Tuesday table with an authority born of necessity. Housewives diced potatoes and onions, fried them in a deep pan with dripping, then crumbled in a tin of corned beef and a splash of HP sauce. 20 minutes later, the hash crisped at the edges and steamed in the middle, ready to be spooned onto plates with brown sauce on the side. By 1955, a tin of corned beef from Argentina cost 1 and 9p and stretched to feed a family of 6. Children eyed the dish with mixed feelings. The metallic tang of the meat divided opinion sharply. But fathers ate with relish, and mothers were grateful for a supper that asked nothing but a frying pan and 20 minutes. Hash was the taste of a Britain still rebuilding, a meal born of tinned imports and the desperate need to put something hot on the table. Number 9. Oxtail stew turned the bony, gristly tail end of the cow into something so rich that even the wealthy began to envy what the poor had been eating for generations. Housewives bought oxtails for twopence a pound, browned the segments in dripping, then braised them for 4 hours with onions, carrots, and a splash of stout until the meat slipped from the bone and the gravy turned glossy with natural gelatin. By 1953, oxtail stew was the Sunday backup when a proper joint was beyond the budget, a one-pot supper that fed 6 on a tail and a few vegetables. Children sucked the marrow from the bones, while mothers stretched the leftovers into soup the next day. The smell of slow braising oxtail filled the back kitchen all afternoon, a promise that something deeply satisfying was waiting at the end of the wait. Number 8. Rabbit stew answered the meat shortage of post-war Britain with a creature that cost less than the bread on the table. Housewives bought rabbits from the market for 9pence each, jointed them with a sharp knife, and simmered the pieces with onions, carrots, and a handful of pearl barley for 2 hours until the meat fell from the bone. By 1952, rabbit was the cheapest fresh protein in Britain, and a single animal stretched to feed a family of 6 with bread on the side. Children eyed the legs first, mothers saved the saddle for the youngest, and fathers took whatever was left, grateful for any meat at all. Oral histories recall the pride in making one rabbit last 2 days, and the disappointment when the market ran dry. As chicken prices fell in the 1960s, rabbit stew faded from the weekly menu, but its memory lingers as proof of what thrift could conjure. Number 7. Scotch broth anchored the Scottish weeknight table with a thickness that bordered on solid. Housewives simmered scrag end of mutton with pearl barley, dried peas, leeks, swede, and carrots in one enormous pot for 3 hours, ladling out bowls so dense that the spoon would stand upright. By 1956, a pot of Scotch broth fed a family of 6 for under 1 shilling, and the leftovers thickened overnight into something even richer the next day. Children watched mothers chop the vegetables with quiet efficiency, while fathers came in from the cold and reached for the bread before the bowl had even landed. The smell of barley and mutton drifted through tenement closes from Aberdeen to Edinburgh, a signal that the worst of the day was over and the best of it was about to begin around the kitchen table. Number 6. Beef stew and dumplings crowned countless British tables on Wednesday nights when the Sunday roast was a distant memory and Friday's pay packet was still days away. Housewives browned shin of beef with onions and carrots, simmered the lot for 2 hours, then dropped spoonfuls of suet dumpling dough onto the surface and clamped the lid down tight. The dumplings steamed and swelled into pale, fluffy clouds that soaked up the rich brown gravy. By 1955, a pound of shin cost 1 and 3pence, and the resulting stew fed 6 with dumplings on top. Children watched the lid lifted, the steam rising in a great rush, the dumplings revealed in all their puffy glory. Oral histories recall the satisfaction of a fork sinking through dumpling into gravy and the way the whole house smelled of beef and herbs by the time the lamps came on. Number 5. Irish stew crossed the Irish Sea with generations of migrants and settled into kitchens from Liverpool to Camden Town, a one-pot supper of mutton, potatoes and onions that asked for nothing more. Housewives layered the ingredients in a heavy pot, covered them with water, and let the lot simmer for 2 hours until the potatoes broke down and thickened the broth into something almost creamy. By 1954, a pound of mutton cost 9pence, and a pot of Irish stew fed a family of 6 for under a shilling. Children watched mothers ladle out bowls of pale, fragrant stew, the meat falling apart at the touch of a spoon. There were no carrots in a proper Irish stew, no herbs beyond pepper and parsley, just the honest pairing of meat, root and water. Oral histories recall it as the taste of home, no matter how far that home had drifted. Number 4. Lobby, known as scouse in Liverpool and lobscouse to the sailors who carried it across the Atlantic, gave the city its very nickname and its working families their weekly supper. Housewives browned chunks of cheap beef or lamb with onions, added potatoes and root vegetables, and simmered the lot in one pot for 3 hours until the meat surrendered and the potatoes turned to thick, savoury mush. By 1953, a pot of scouse cost barely a shilling and fed 8 with bread on the side. When money was especially tight, the dish was made without meat at all and called blind scouse. Children ate it with red cabbage on the side. Mothers stretched the leftovers into the next day's lunch, and fathers came home from the docks to a kitchen warm with the smell of slow-cooked beef. Scouse was Liverpool itself in a single steaming bowl. Number 3. Lancashire hot pot rose from the mill towns of the northwest with a quiet authority that no other one-pot dish could quite match. Housewives layered chunks of mutton, kidneys, onions, and thinly sliced potatoes in a deep brown earthenware pot poured over a thin stock, and let the lot bake slowly in a low oven for 3 hours. The topmost potatoes crisped to a golden crust, while the meat below turned tender enough to eat with a spoon. By 1952, mutton cost 1 and 8 a pound, and the hot pot fed 6 for less than 2 shillings. In Lancashire, it was said you could smell a good hot pot 3 doors down, the aroma drifting through cobbled back alleys as the mill workers walked home in the dusk. Every mother claimed her version was best. Every child had a favourite corner. Hot pot was identity, ritual, and supper all served from the same brown pot. Number 2. Welsh caul crowned the Welsh hearth as the ultimate expression of one-pot thrift. A broth so honest and nourishing that it sustained generations of miners and hill farmers through the bitterest winters. Housewives filled heavy cast-iron pots with bacon, lamb shanks, leeks, cabbage, swede, and potatoes, then let the lot simmer for 3 hours over a coal fire until the kitchen filled with a warm, savoury steam. By 1955, a pot of caul cost barely 1 and 6 and fed a family for 2 days, the broth growing richer overnight as the flavours deepened. Children dipped hunks of bread into the bowl, mothers ladled out generous portions, and fathers came home from the pit to a supper that asked nothing but gave everything. Oral histories recall the smell drifting from stone cottages across the valleys, a quiet promise that no Welsh family would go to bed cold or hungry tonight. And finally, in first place, beef stew with suet crust, the dish so beloved that mothers across Britain considered it the highest expression of the one-pot art. Housewives browned shin or skirt of beef with onions and carrots, simmered the meat for 2 hours in a thick brown gravy, then lined the inside of a pudding basin with sweet pastry, filled it with the stew, sealed it with a pastry lid, and steamed the whole thing for another 2 hours over a pot of bubbling water. The result was a self-contained supper, golden crust on the outside, dark, fragrant filling within. By 1954, a steamed beef pudding cost less than 2 shillings to make and fed a family of 6 with mash and gravy on the side. Children watched the basin turned out at the table, the crust splitting open with a soft sigh of steam, the meat tumbling onto the plate in a rush of dark gravy. Oral histories recall the pride in a well-made sweet crust, the way the pudding could be made on Sunday morning and forgotten about until tea time. The deep certainty that no matter what the week had thrown at the family, supper tonight would be hot, rich, and absolutely enough. Beef pudding was the crowning achievement of the British grandmother's one-pot kitchen, a meal that asked for patience and rewarded it with a feast. Across all 25 entries, from the humble brown Windsor soup that opened our list to the triumphant beef pudding at the very top, these one-pot suppers tell a story of women who turned scarcity into skill and cheap cuts into comfort. The common thread is patience, thrift, and the quiet refusal to let any family member go to bed hungry. These were not just meals. They were the steady, daily acts of love that held the post-war British home together, one bubbling pot at a time.